Why did everyone laugh when she entered the room? The mess hall throbbed with noise, trays clattering, boots dragging, laughter bouncing off concrete walls. The kind of laughter that doesn't mean joy, just exhaustion turned cruel. Under the fluorescent lights, the air shimmered with heat and the stale smell of overcooked beans. Soldiers moved like ghosts through routine, waiting for orders, waiting for mail, waiting for something that broke the monotony of deployment. And in the middle of it all, there she was. Sergeant First Class. Hair tucked under a net, apron creased, no combat patch, no ranger tab showing, just a name tape and quiet eyes. To most, she was invisible. To some, she was a joke. At one of the center tables sat Captain Lewis, young, proud, sharp jawline, uniform pressed like a recruiting poster. He watched her pass with that half grin that meant he'd already made his judgment. "Army cuisine at its finest," he muttered, loud enough for his officers to hear. "Bet she's got PTA bake sales lined up after this deployment. Maybe then she'll serve something edible." The lieutenants laughed, too eagerly, too loud, the kind of laugh that wants approval, not humor. Didn't flinch, didn't answer. She kept moving, tray balanced, footsteps steady, eyes forward. Her silence wasn't defiance. It was something else, something heavier. The kind of stillness that only exists in people who already seen too much. She set the tray down, wiped her hands on a towel and turned back toward the kitchen. Behind her, the laughter carried on hollow, cheap, easy. To them, she was just the cook. No one saw the faint limp that appeared when she was tired. No one noticed the small burn scars on her wrist, half hidden under her sleeve. They didn't see the way her eyes scanned exits, corners, angles, the instinct of someone who once had to read danger in seconds. They didn't know. And she didn't tell them. For 16 years, Sergeant First Class had worn the uniform. Bosnia, Iraq, Afghanistan. She'd done the long deployments, the cold bivouacs, the nights that lasted years. But now she was here in the kitchen, serving coffee to soldiers who would never know her history. On paper, she was temporarily reassigned. Off-combat rotations. Medical note attached. No details given. Some guessed injury. Others whispered about mental strain. A few said she froze up during a mission. No one really knew, but everyone talked. Never corrected them. Rumors, she'd learned, were a kind of fire. Feed them and they burned hotter. Ignore them and they still left scars. So she let them burn. She worked her shifts, served her meals, cleaned after everyone else. When a private dropped a tray, she was the first to kneel and help. When someone missed a portion, she quietly slipped them more. She was the kind of soldier who didn't talk about service. She lived it. But quiet kindness is easy to overlook, especially in a world that mistakes noise for strength. Captain Lewis noticed her again a few days later. He had a habit of noticing people only when he could mock them. "Sergeant," he said, voice dripping with sarcasm, "try not to burn the eggs this time. We've got standards to keep." He smirked. The younger officers laughed again. Just nodded, "Yes, sir." She ladled eggs onto his tray, the same rhythm as always, steady, careful. He didn't realize how close her hands were to trembling, not from anger but from memory, from restraint. Because once she'd commanded soldiers who would snap to attention at her voice. Now she served breakfast to those same ranks. But she didn't let it show. Because dignity doesn't need an audience. That night, long after the last tray had been stacked, the mess hall was quiet except for the hum of the fluorescent lights. Outside, desert wind hissed through the wire. Inside, wiped down the counters, polished the urns, and set coffee for the morning shift. Her movements were slow, deliberate, a ritual. Not for praise, but for peace. She paused at one point and looked up at the small photos taped above her bunk in the corner. A young man, her son, smiling in a cadet uniform. Another picture, him in a football jersey, grin wide, eyes proud. Her breath softened. He was 19 now, ROTC back in the States. Her reason, her anchor, had been many things in uniform: a ranger, qualified soldier, a leader, a woman who had seen lives end and begin in the space of a heartbeat. But the army wasn't sentimental. It rarely asked why someone got reassigned. It just moved on. So when the med officer said temporary non-combat, she signed the paper, saluted, and reported to kitchen duty. No argument, no explanation. Because sometimes silence is easier than trying to make people understand. The next morning, the whispers returned. "She washed out," one corporal said near the sink. "Got soft," another replied. "Probably couldn't hack it." "I heard she messed up a mission, got people killed." Laughter again, thin, sharp, cowardly. Kept scrubbing the pans, the metal squeaking beneath her cloth. She heard every word, but she didn't stop, didn't turn. Her jaw tightened once, that was all. Private 19, fresh out of L, watched from across the room. Something about the way she stood, the stillness, bothered him. It wasn't weakness. It wasn't fear. It was endurance. Like a wall that had stood through storms. He didn't join the laughter again. Days blurred, heat, noise, routine, mockery. The army's rhythm has a cruel predictability. The loud rise, the quiet fade. Silence made her a target, but it also made her unreadable. That unnerved people more than they realized. At one point, two corporals leaned against the wall, watching her mop. "Man, that's all she does," one said. "Mop, cook, clean. Must been nice flunking out of real work." The other smirked. "Yeah, guess that's what happens when you can't keep up." They laughed, but when straightened, turned slightly and glanced over, just a glance, the sound cut off. Her eyes weren't angry. They were tired. And they carried something both men couldn't name. They looked away first. Later that evening, a private trip near the serving line. The tray clattered, silverware scattered, a few soldiers chuckled. Before the young man could bend down, was already kneeling beside him. Her hands were steady, her voice soft. "Take your time, happens to everyone." The laughter died instantly. It wasn't the tone. It was the authority beneath it, calm, weighty, unshakable. The kind of authority that doesn't need to shout to be obeyed. For a brief second, the entire hall went still. And then, the noise returned as if nothing happened. But something had happened. A shift, subtle, invisible. The kind of change that begins not with words, but with respect. That night she sat outside under the stars. The desert stretched endless around the base. She sipped burnt coffee from a tin mug, letting the night air cool her thoughts. She thought about the things she'd seen. About her team. About the sound of rotors cutting through smoke and the smell of sand mixed with cordite. Things she didn't talk about, couldn't. Her left hand brushed the scar on her wrist. Her breathing steadied. Some memories don't fade, they just learn to stay quiet. Inside, Captain Lewis joked again. Someone mentioned the cook during a card game. He laughed, raising his beer. "You mean she's harmless? If she's special forces, then I'm." The room laughed, but even he noticed faintly that not everyone joined in this time. Private didn't. Specialist Carter didn't either. Something had shifted, small but real. Because people had started to watch her. The way she moved. The way she scanned. The way she stayed calm when others lost composure. Little details, too small for an ordinary cook. When the lights went out that night, was still awake. Lying in her bunk, staring at the ceiling, the hum of the generator outside like a heartbeat. In the dark, her thoughts replayed moments no one else would ever know: the sound of rotors over, the heat of shrapnel, the weight of a soldier she'd carried across a ridge. 43 lives saved, counted in silence. Now she carried trays instead of rifles. But in her mind, the mission had never ended. She whispered to herself, a line she'd learned to live by. Service doesn't end when the shooting stops. The next day she walked into the mess hall again. The same noise, the the same smells, the same laughter waiting to bite. Captain Lewis caught her in his peripheral vision and leaned toward his officers. "Careful, boys. Don't anger the kitchen queen. Might oversalt your eggs." Laughter again, easy, predictable. His hands moved calmly. She filled each tray, each motion exact, balanced. She never looked up. But deep inside, something had begun to shift, not anger, not pride, just quiet resolve. Because the more they laughed, the more they revealed what they didn't know. And one day they would. When the shift ended, she returned to her bunk, pulled out an old olive duffel bag. The fabric was worn, the zipper teeth bent from years of use. She ran a hand along the faded stitching, the outline of a Ranger tab, barely holding on. Her thumb rested on it a long time. Then she zipped the bag shut and placed it back under the bed. There was no need to explain. Not yet. Because silence can be a weapon too, one that cuts deepest when the truth finally lands. And hers would. Soon. Why did the air feel different every time she walked in? It wasn't something anyone could name. It was subtle, the kind of thing you only noticed when you stopped talking long enough to listen. The mess hall sounded the same trays, the same noise. But when passed by, laughter faltered, even for a second, as if her silence had learned how to make noise. She still said nothing, still worked without pause, but people had started to see her. And that made them uncomfortable. Captain Lewis didn't like that feeling. He told himself it was nonsense. He told his officers the same. "She's just a cook," he said again, louder this time, as if volume could make it true. "Don't read into it. She just knows how to keep her head down." But even he noticed how the younger soldiers had begun to stop laughing so easily. Private especially, the same kid who used to snicker when she walked past, now kept his head low, hands folded on his tray. His eyes followed her movements quietly, unsure what he was seeing but certain it wasn't what everyone believed. One afternoon, as the desert heat pressed against the tents, sat alone in a corner of the mess hall. She was sorting rations, quiet, methodical, the same routine as always. A few soldiers passed by, laughing about weekend rotations. Their voices echoed off the metal walls. "Still scrubbing pots," one said. "Guess PT didn't work out," the other replied. "They should give her a medal for." The laughter that followed was short, uneasy. Even they could feel it. The joke didn't land the way it used to. Didn't look up. She finished sorting the cans, stacked them in perfect alignment, then stood. Her posture was straight, deliberate, the kind of bearing that didn't belong in a kitchen. The two soldiers went silent without knowing why. She passed them, gave a nod, and disappeared through the door. They didn't laugh again. But rumors, like desert wind, always find cracks to slip through. By that week's end, the stories had evolved. She botched a mission. She froze during a firefight. She's just waiting for retirement. The lies grew like weeds, watered by boredom, fertilized by ego. Heard all of them, every version, every whisper that floated just within earshot. She didn't fight them. She learned that truth doesn't survive through argument, only through endurance. And endurance was something she understood better than anyone. That Friday morning she arrived early to prep breakfast. The air was still cool. Her hands moved through the motions like memory, coffee urns, powdered eggs, the metallic smell of trays. Outside, the sun had just begun to bleed over the horizon, painting the tents gold. She paused at the window for a moment, eyes fixed on the light breaking through sandstorms far away. Somewhere beyond those dunes, she had once fought, led, saved. But now she served. Her reflection in the glass was faint, uniform faded, eyes older. She didn't resent it, not really. She just wondered sometimes if this was how the army forgot its own. Later that morning, as the hall filled, Captain Lewis strode in same confidence, same grin that came too easily. He loved these moments, The way the room shifted when he arrived, the way Lieutenant straightened in his shadow. He spotted at the serving line and smirked. "Careful with the salt, Sergeant," he said, voice just loud enough to carry. "Wouldn't want anyone getting hurt in your line of fire." The joke landed, laughter rippled. It was cruel, effortless. And she didn't flinch. She just kept moving, eyes steady, motions calm. But this time, the quiet after the laughter lasted longer. Private looked down at his tray, shame burning in his ears. Specialist Carter shifted awkwardly, pretending to adjust his cup. Even Lewis noticed the hesitation, the laughter thinner, weaker, almost forced. He frowned, confused. "What?" he said. "It's just a joke." But no one answered. That night, as the generators hummed, sat on the edge of her bunk, unzipping an old olive duffel bag. The fabric was frayed, the zipper's metal teeth bent from years of use. She reached inside, fingers brushing over something rough, a stitched patch barely clinging to the surface. A Ranger tab, torn, faded, half hanging by the threads. Her breath caught. For a second the memories came rushing back, not words, not pictures, just flashes. Rain slashing through the mountains. Rotors overhead. The heat of smoke, the radio crackling in her ear. "Valkyrie 6, you're clear for pickup, LZ hot." She closed her eyes. Then just as quickly, she zipped the bag shut and slid it back under the bunk. Some truths were better left quiet, at least for now. But silence in the military never stays silent for long. Sunday morning. Quiet. The kind of day soldiers used for laundry, rest, or boredom, was cleaning his weapon when he saw her again, kneeling beside her bunk, rummaging through that same duffel. The faded patch caught his eye before she noticed. "Wait," he blurted, voice small. Is that a Ranger tab?" Froze, her hand rested on the bag for a heartbeat. Then she zipped it closed, firm, final. "Old gear," she said. Her tone didn't invite questions. She stood, slung the bag over her shoulder and walked past him, no expression, no explanation. The silence she left behind felt heavier than an answer. Stared after her, pulse quickening. He wasn't sure what unsettled him more, the tab itself, or the fact that it was hers. A week later, the next clue came. The heat that day was merciless, the kind that melted thought. Soldiers moved slow, their voices dry. Was hauling supplies from the back storage area, boxes stacked too high, weight uneven. As one crate slipped, she caught it midair, but the motion rolled up her sleeve. The scar flashed in the sunlight, long, jagged, twisting down her forearm. Not surgery. Not an accident. The kind of scar that comes from shrapnel or fire. Private Miller, new and naive, snickered. "Whoa, what happened there, Sergeant? That from boiling water or something?" The laughter was automatic, soldiers eager to fit in. His eyes met his, calm. "Not from cooking," she said softly. Then she rolled the sleeve down and walked away. The silence afterward was brutal. Miller swallowed hard. No one laughed again. By now the whispers had changed. They weren't cruel anymore, they were curious, nervous. "Did you see that scar?" "She had a Ranger tab. I swear I saw it." "She moves different, like she's trained." Speculation replaced mockery, and curiosity in the Army spreads faster than rumor. Even Captain Lewis caught the echo of it. He waved it off, though. "Don't let ghost stories fool you," he told his lieutenants. "Someone sees a patch, suddenly she's Rambo, she's just a cook, nothing more." But the conviction in his voice wasn't what it used to be. Then came the moment that changed everything. It was late, mess hall almost empty. The hum of the fridge filled the space. Sat alone at a back table, writing in a worn leather notebook, pages filled with neat handwriting. A photo slipped out, fluttering to the floor. Specialist Carter bent instinctively to pick it up. He froze halfway. The photo showed in desert camouflage, helmet tucked under her arm, standing shoulder to shoulder with a group of soldiers in front of her. The call sign stenciled on the side read Valkyrie 6. Dust blurred the background, but her face was unmistakable, calm, focused, commanding. She wasn't in the background. She was in the center. Carter's breath caught. Before he could speak, his hand closed over the photo. "Private possession," she said, voice calm. Then she tucked it back into her notebook and walked away. She didn't need to explain. The silence did it for her. By the next morning, the story had spread across the base like wildfire. "Valkyrie 6, that's a call sign, right? Unit, maybe special ops support. She's not just a cook, is she?" Even Captain Lewis hesitated when Carter described the photo to him. The edges of arrogance had softened. He didn't admit it, but for the first time, doubt crept in. Never confirmed anything, never it either. When someone asked, "Sergeant, were you Ranger qualified?" she simply said, "I serve where I'm needed." When another asked about Valkyrie 6, she replied, "Just a call sign." Her tone ended every conversation before it could begin. But it didn't stop the questions or the growing unease. Because silence once again had shifted. It no longer sounded like weakness. It sounded like waiting. That week the mess hall felt different. Soldiers still talked, but their laughter came slower. Eyes flicked toward without meaning to. She could feel it, the weight of new attention pressing from every angle. And though she kept her rhythm steady, her heart felt the tremor of something stirring beneath the surface, something she'd spent years burying. Respect was coming back into the room, but so was memory. And both had sharp edges. She wanted peace, anonymity, the simple act of serving quietly. But the past has a way of finding you, even when you're just trying to serve lunch. She stood by the window at dusk, arms folded, watching the horizon bleed into darkness. The wind whipped sand across the glass. Maybe it was time they remembered who she was. Not through stories, not through rank, but through truth. Why did she sound like command when she shouted? It started on a Tuesday, just another sweltering, dull day in the middle of nowhere. The kind of day soldiers hate because it gives them too much time to think. The air shimmered with heat. The sand outside glared white. And in the mess hall, trays clanged, boots dragged, jokes recycled from yesterday. Was hauling a crate of vegetables across the prep line when the siren hit. The base alarm screamed, sharp, metallic, slicing through chatter like a blade. Everyone froze, then chaos erupted. Boots thundered, chairs toppled, half the hall moved one way, half another. Someone shouted, "Incoming, incoming." Someone else yelled, "Drill, it's just a drill." The confusion was the point, a base-wide readiness exercise. Every soldier knew it was coming eventually. But drills don't announce themselves, and panic is an easy habit. Set the crate down carefully, then her voice cut through the noise. "Private's north wall, move, you two cover the rear exit, no bunching up, spacing." The tone wasn't loud, it didn't need to be. It carried. The kind of tone that hits your spine before your brain. It was a command voice. The nearest privates flinched, then reacted, instinctively obeying before realizing what they were doing. Their boots hit the ground in rhythm, moving faster, cleaner, sharper than before. Lieutenant Gaines, the officer assigned to oversee the drill, froze when he heard it. He turned toward the mess hall, frowning. The voice sounded like it came from someone who had been trained to control chaos. He pushed open the door, and there she was. The cook moving among soldiers with purpose, calm, steady, precise. Hands gesturing, eyes scanning corners, exits, spacing, every motion deliberate. She moved like someone who had done this 1,000 times before. "Keep your spacing," she barked again. "Don't cluster, that door's your choke point." The privates moved exactly as ordered. By the time the alarm cut off, they were in near-perfect formation, cover position secured, eyes forward, breathing heavy. Gaines stared, So did everyone else. Didn't look at them. She just picked the crate back up, set it on the counter, and went back to work. As if nothing had happened. When the drill report went out later that day, the lieutenant noted exceptional composure from kitchen staff. But the soldiers didn't need a report to tell them what they'd seen. Whispers started immediately. She knew exactly what to do. That wasn't luck. Who the hell trains a cook like that? Captain Lewis dismissed it again, waving off questions with a tired smirk. She probably watched a few training videos, he said. You yell loud enough, people listen. Don't overthink it. But even he had heard her voice during the alarm, sharp, calm, efficient. It wasn't noise. It was control. And control like that doesn't come from practice drills. It comes from combat. A week later, the drill didn't feel like practice anymore. It was late evening, dinner hour. The mess hall buzzed with the usual noise, laughter bouncing off steel and tile. Soldiers, half distracted, half exhausted, was pouring coffee for the night shift when the first explosion hit. It wasn't a drill this time. The ground shook. Trays flew. Coffee spilled across tables. The second blast hit closer, the unmistakable whistle of a mortar round. Take cover, someone screamed. Where? Outside near the... The voices collided in panic. Tables overturned, plates shattered, chairs screeched against the floor. The air filled with dust and shouts. And through it all, her voice again. Down, get under cover now. It wasn't loud, but it cut through everything: fear, noise, confusion. Every soldier in that room obeyed before thinking. Moved fast. She pulled a frozen private by the collar, shoving him under a table. She kicked a chair aside, guided another soldier behind a concrete pillar. Every motion was precise, instinctual, not a hint of panic. The next blast rattled the ceiling. Dust poured from the rafters. Keep your heads down, eyes on me, she shouted. Her tone was calm but commanding enough to quiet chaos itself. Then came the scream. Outside, near the entryway, a young private lay on the ground, clutching his leg. Blood pooled beneath him, dark and spreading fast. Didn't hesitate. She sprinted through the dust, dropped to her knees beside him, and pressed her hands against the wound. Pressure here, she said, voice steady. You rip that cloth now. Specialist Carter, eyes wide, tore a strip from his sleeve and handed it over. Twisted the cloth high on the leg, tying it off with the precision of muscle memory. A textbook tourniquet. She turned the knot once, twice. The bleeding slowed almost instantly. The medic arrived seconds later, skidding beside her. He froze, staring. That's perfect technique, he muttered. Nodded once, rose to her feet and surveyed the room again, scanning, counting, recalibrating. Everyone stay down until we get the all clear, she said. Then she walked back toward the serving line, calm, collected, hands streaked with blood she didn't bother to wipe away. When the alarms finally ceased, and the all clear echoed across the base, the silence that followed was unlike anything the mess hall had ever heard. Dozens of soldiers stared at her, the woman they'd mocked, laughed at, ignored. Captain Lewis stood near the doorway, helmet half buckled, dust coating his uniform. He looked at her for a long moment, not speaking, just seeing. Then he turned and left. No one laughed that night. By morning, the whispers weren't whispers anymore. They were conviction. She saved that kid's life. She knew exactly what to do under fire. She's trained, no way she's just a cook. The rumor mill that once ridiculed her now carried something else: respect. Uneasy, uncertain, but real. Private told anyone who'd listen. She didn't flinch, he said. Not once. It's like she's done that before, like she's done it a lot. Carter nodded beside him. That tourniquet, it wasn't luck. It was muscle memory. She's been there. And for once, no one argued. But Captain Lewis couldn't let go of the confusion twisting in his chest. He watched her that morning as she poured coffee like nothing happened. The same rhythm, the same silence. He tried to tell himself it was coincidence, training, instinct, anything to avoid the truth pressing in on him. Because if she wasn't who he thought she was, then what did that say about him? He built a reputation on control, leadership through authority, through noise. But she led through silence, and silence had outperformed him. That night sat alone again, the desert wind pushing through the open mess hall door. The sand hissed across the concrete. She stared at the empty tables, at the stains of dust and blood they hadn't cleaned yet. Her hands rested on the table still, but her heartbeat wasn't. It pounded softly beneath her calm. She wasn't angry. She wasn't proud either. She was tired. She'd spent years hiding the part of her that the army used up and discarded, the part that still reacted before thought, that still saw danger before sound. She buried that soldier deep. But under mortar fire, instinct doesn't ask permission. It just wakes up. And once awake, it never really sleeps again. The next morning when Captain Lewis walked into the hall, the noise didn't return the way it used to. Soldiers talked quieter. Laughter felt cautious, almost guilty, was already serving breakfast as always. For a moment, their eyes met across the line. She didn't glare, didn't smile, just looked calm, level, unreadable. Lewis dropped his tray onto the counter. "You were lucky last night," he said softly. "That mortar could." "Wasn't luck, sir," she interrupted. Her voice was polite, steady. Then she handed him his plate. "You still want the usual." He hesitated. "Yeah," he said finally, "the usual." And that was the first time he didn't make a joke. That night Specialist Carter and Private sat on their bunks, voices low. "You were right," Carter said. "She's trained more than any of us." Nodded. "She doesn't brag, doesn't have to. That's the scariest kind of soldier, the one who doesn't need to prove anything." Neither of them realized that same truth had once been whispered about years before, on a radio frequency somewhere in the mountains of Provence. "Valkyrie 6, we're pinned, requesting extraction." "Copy that, sit tight, I'm bringing you home." The mess hall quieted early that week. Soldiers still talked, but with a new weight in their words. The mockery was gone. The easy laughter had died. Even the air felt different, heavier, cleaner. And when walked in, no one looked away anymore. They didn't salute, not yet. But respect had begun to take root, fragile but growing. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel something she hadn't in months. Not pride. Not vindication. Just peace. Because she knew something they didn't. Truth always finds its way to the surface. And when it does, it doesn't need to shout. It just stands there. Why was she standing in the briefing room? The question whispered across the rows of uniforms like static before a storm. The room was cold, too cold. The air conditioner hummed overhead, sharp against the desert heat outside. Fluorescent lights buzzed over laminated maps, photographs, and thick folders stacked in perfect military precision. It was a place meant for officers, for rank, for strategy, not for cooks. And yet there she was, Sergeant First Class, standing silently by the back wall, no apron, no hairnet, no trace of the kitchen. Just a clean uniform, sleeves rolled, a pen clipped neatly to her notebook. She hadn't been told why she was there, only that her presence was requested. She didn't ask by whom. She just showed up, on time, ready. The low chatter of officers filled the space. Coffee steamed in paper cups. Pens clicked against clipboards. Captain Lewis sat near the front, posture rigid, jaw set, eyes on the map but seeing everything else. He caught sight of her in the reflection of the projector screen and frowned. "What the hell is she doing here?" he muttered to the lieutenant beside him. The younger man shrugged, nervous. "No idea, sir." Then the door opened, and Colonel walked in. Wasn't a loud man, he didn't need to be. He had the kind of presence that made rooms fall quiet before he even spoke. Seasoned, measured, the kind of commander who'd seen enough to understand what mattered and what didn't. He carried a tan folder under his arm, plain, unmarked, worn at the edges. He set it on the table in front of him like it carried weight far beyond paper. "Let's get to it," he said. His voice was calm, even, the kind of tone that made people listen without being told to. The operations officer began the usual run-through: routes, logistics, weather patterns, air support, fallback lines. Arrows filled the whiteboard in blue and red marker. The room moved through the motions. Then placed his hand on the tan folder. "Before we finalize tasking," he said, "we need to clarify an asset's background." The room stilled. No one spoke. He slid the folder across the table toward Captain Lewis. "Open it," said. Lewis hesitated, confused. He flipped the cover open. The first page stared back, a personnel summary. He skimmed the line at the top, expecting something routine. Then his eyes froze. His voice faltered, "Sergeant First Class." The silence that followed was immediate, heavy. A hum built in the fluorescent lights, filling the space where words used to be. Every head turned toward the back of the room, toward her. She didn't move, didn't blink, just stood with her hands clasped lightly behind her back. Her face calm, her breathing steady. The same quiet that had filled the mess hall, now filling the room. Didn't wait. He spoke with the gravity of someone reciting not a file, but a record written in blood. "Sergeant First Class, former 160th SOAR Support." His tone was even. "Bronze Star with Valor, Distinguished Service Cross nominee. Call sign Valkyrie 6. He paused, let the silence breathe. "Credited with saving 43 soldiers during an ambush outside Province." The air seemed to collapse inward. No one spoke. Someone's pen tapped once against the table, then stopped. Even the projector seemed to hum quieter, as if the electricity itself had leaned in to listen. Continued, not dramatic, not proud, just factual. "Convoy pinned, 2 vehicles disabled, fire from both, aviation support delayed by weather and contact frequency. Sergeant coordinated ground-to-air link-up under fire, improvised LZ and directed 3 birds in through a mountain corridor below ceiling. Maintained comms under hostile fire for 21 minutes. Casualty count, 43 evacuated. 0 KIA from extraction element." He looked up from the page. "That's what the record says, but the record doesn't capture everything." Lewis's throat tightened. He looked at the paper again, reading the words he had mocked out loud only days ago: cook, kitchen duty, medical reassignment. His chest felt hollow. Lifted a photo from the folder and set it flat on the table. The same image that Carter had seen in the mess hall. Dust, blades blurred in motion. A 60 behind her, Valkyrie 6 stenciled on its flank. And in front, helmet under her arm, calm, focused, center of gravity in chaos. "She doesn't look like a cook there, does she?" Someone muttered softly and immediately regretted saying it. Didn't respond, he didn't need to. The silence was its own reprimand. A captain from the intel team cleared his throat, trying to regain the room's rhythm. "Sir, if I may, why is she assigned to the kitchen?" Meta's eyes steady. "Temporary medical reassignment," he said, "on paper by order." Then after a pause, "on purpose." He let the words hang there. The message behind them was clear. Some things aren't mistakes, they're choices. A few officers looked down, shame tightening in their chest. Captain Lewis most of all. Set his palm on the folder, fingers tapping once, a slow, steady beat. "Some of you have heard stories," he said quietly. "Some of you have added to them." He scanned the room. "That ends now." The air thickened. No one moved. "What matters for our purposes," he continued, is that mission success depends on people who do not need to be told who they are to do what they're trained to do. He turned toward. "Sergeant," he said, voice even. "You've been reactivated for temporary assignment as Ground Coordination Lead, Contingency Air Link-Up. Limited scope. Advisory authority to the operations cell." It wasn't a request. It wasn't ceremony. It was an order and a recognition all at once. Lewis felt the floor tilt beneath him. He'd mocked her, laughed at her. And now he was being ordered to take guidance from her, the same woman he'd dismissed as a mess hall cook. His voice came out smaller than he meant. "Sir, is that appropriate, given her?" Looked at him, calm, not angry, not condescending. "Just steady." "Captain," he said, "if you're asking whether it's appropriate to rely on the one person in this room who has taken 43 names off a memorial wall, the answer is yes." The words landed like a stone dropped in still water, ripples moving through every man and woman in the room. Lewis swallowed hard. His jaw worked once, then settled. "Yes, sir," he said quietly. Nodded once, not as approval but as closure. The colonel turned back to the map, voice resuming its even cadence. "We brief lines of drift and calm windows in 10. S2, compressed terrain overlays to decision points. Air cell, give me realistic windows, not optimistic ones." The officers moved automatically, pens scratching, markers squeaking on the board. But the energy in the room had shifted. Every man there had been reminded what real authority looked like, and it didn't come from bars or brass. It came from earned silence. Lewis didn't look at again at first. He stared at the map instead, at the thin line representing a valley road curling through the mountains, the same kind of terrain she had once fought through. Then slowly, as if compelled, he turned his head. Their eyes met. No words passed between them. No apology yet. But the understanding was there, raw, heavy, human. The man who mocked had finally met the woman he mocked, and found himself small. As the meeting wrapped up, dismissed teams in sections. Air first, then intel, then fires. The room slowly emptied. Maps gathered, folders stacked, chairs pushed back into place. The clatter of movement filled the silence that none of them knew how to break. Captain Lewis lingered, so did. He stood beside the table where the photo still lay under the fluorescent light, her photo. Valkyrie 6 frozen in dust and motion. He placed his fingertips lightly on its edge. "Sergeant," he said quietly, his voice caught then steadied, "I was wrong. It wasn't loud, it wasn't meant to be. Just a confession, plain, unadorned, honest." "Didn't hesitate. We've all been wrong before, sir," she said softly, then added, "We just do better next." For a moment neither of them moved. Then he nodded, slow, deliberate. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was something better. "Respect." Gathered the folder, tucking it under his arm. Before he left, he paused at the door. "Some of you learned something today about rank," he said quietly. "And some of you learned something today about weight." Then he left. And with him went the rumor that had replaced truth. What remained was silence, but it wasn't the cold silence of ignorance anymore. It was the warm, heavy silence of understanding. When the room emptied, was the last to leave. She picked up her notebook, slid the pen into its clip, and stepped into the hallway. Her boots echoed softly on the tile. She didn't walk faster, didn't walk taller. Just steady, calm, the same rhythm as always. The difference was in the eyes that watched her go, eyes that finally saw. That night the base was still. The desert air carried heat even after sunset. Sat outside, her hands folded, gaze fixed on the horizon. The stars blinked through the haze, faint, distant, familiar. She thought about the soldiers she'd pulled from the wreckage, about the ones who hadn't made it before she arrived. She thought about how the noise of mockery had once been louder than the sound of helicopters, louder even than gunfire. And how somehow silence had outlasted it all. She took a slow breath, the air dry in her lungs. The army hadn't changed much. But maybe tonight, a few people inside it had. And that was enough. Why did the mess hall fall silent when she walked in? The next morning, nothing looked different. The same tents, the same sun bleeding through sandstorms, the same smell of instant coffee and diesel. But something in the air had shifted, something quiet, invisible, impossible to ignore. Word travels fast on a base. Faster than orders. Faster than truth. By dawn, the story had already moved through the barracks, through the motor pool, through every platoon. 43 soldiers saved. Bronze Star with valor. Valkyrie 6. The woman they'd called the cook had once commanded helicopters under fire. Nobody knew the whole story, but they knew enough. And for the first time, people were careful with their laughter. Private felt it first. He was in line for breakfast when he noticed the shift. Usually this hour was chaos, jokes, curses, boots scuffing across tile. But that morning it was quiet. Soldiers spoke low. Some didn't speak at all. He held his tray, eyes on the serving line. Stood there same as always, hair tied back, sleeves rolled, serving eggs with her usual calm. But the soldiers' faces were different. No smirks, no whispers. Just silence. Stepped forward, cleared his throat. "Good morning, Sergeant." She glanced up, eyes steady. "Morning, Private." He hesitated, then said softly, "Heard about the briefing, ma'am." Her brow lifted slightly. "Did you?" "Yes, ma'am." His voice was careful, almost reverent. I didn't know." Offered a faint smile. "Most don't, that's all right." He swallowed hard, nodded, and moved on. The line behind him stayed quiet. One by one, each soldier passed her, their voices low, their eyes meeting hers just long enough to say what words couldn't: respect. At the officers' table, Captain Lewis sat rigid, pretending to read a folder he'd already memorized. His coffee had gone cold. He could feel the stares. He could feel her presence across the room, too. He didn't know what to say, not yet. Maybe nothing he could say would matter. Lieutenant Gaines leaned toward him. "You all right, sir?" Lewis didn't answer right away. His eyes flicked toward the serving line. "She was right there the whole time," he said quietly. "Right in front of us." Gaines nodded. "Yeah, and we all missed it." Lewis exhaled slowly. "No, we didn't miss it. We ignored it." Outside, the heat climbed. Inside, the rumors into reverence. Some soldiers printed her commendation from the base network and passed it around like a relic. Others searched Valkyrie 6 online, finding grainy reports from the province extraction, nothing classified, but enough to feel the weight of it. For those who had mocked her, every line of that report felt like a wound reopening. Under sustained fire. Directed air traffic manually under low visibility. 43 personnel extracted alive. The silence in the mess hall wasn't awkward anymore. It was penance. That evening the hall filled again, same hour, same smell of burnt coffee, same hum of tired conversation. But there was something heavy beneath it, an anticipation no one could name. The door opened. Stepped in. No apron, no hairnet, no stains of oil or beans. Just her uniform clean, pressed, her boots scuffed from years of service that could never be polished away. Her name tape caught the light. Her posture was straight, unshaken. She carried a tray in both hands. The first to see her was Private. He froze mid-bite, fork halfway to his mouth. His chest tightened. Then, without thinking, he pushed his chair back and stood. His boots hit the floor with a solid thud. The sound cut through the chatter. Dozens of heads turned. And then silence. For a heartbeat, no one moved. No one understood what was happening. Then raised his right hand to his brow. A salute. Clean, sharp. No hesitation. Across the room, paused in the doorway. Her eyes met his, confusion first, then realization. She opened her mouth to speak, but before a word could leave, another soldier stood. Then another. And another. The sound of chairs scraping filled the air, not harsh, but unified. Within seconds, the entire mess hall was on its feet, dozens of soldiers. Privates, sergeants, lieutenants, even staff NCOs. Some salutes were perfect, some shaky, awkward, too fast. But all of them were real. The kind of salute that doesn't come from rank, but from respect. Didn't move at first. Her tray trembled slightly in her hands, the only crack in her composure anyone had ever seen. She set it down gently on a table and looked around the room. The faces that had once mocked her were still, eyes bright, jaws tight, silent. She could feel their remorse, their awe, their apology. Her chest rose slowly. Her voice, when it came, was steady but soft. "You don't have to." But the words died, because she saw something in their faces that made her stop. It wasn't pity, it wasn't guilt. It was gratitude. The kind that doesn't ask for forgiveness, it offers it. Captain Lewis stood last. He sat at his usual table, the same one where he'd once rolled his eyes and cracked jokes about her. His hands rested flat on the surface, trembling slightly. For a long moment he didn't move. The silence pressed on him, heavy, merciless. Then slowly he rose. The sound of his chair scraping echoed through the hall. Every eye turned. He stood tall, not stiff, not forced, and raised his hand to his brow. His salute was sharp, precise. The kind that says I was wrong. The kind that says you were right. His eyes met his. No smile, no bitterness, just quiet understanding. She shifted her tray to one hand, raised the other in a small, firm nod. Not a salute, not an acknowledgement of hierarchy, but of humanity. A simple gesture that said, "I accept." And in that moment, the air in the mess hall changed forever. No one spoke. No one dared to. The silence stretched, not uncomfortable but sacred. Then slowly walked forward. Her boots thudded softly against the tile. The line of soldiers parted instinctively, giving her space. She set her tray down at the nearest table and sat, just as she had every day before. But this time, no one else sat until she did. No one touched their food until she picked up her fork. And when conversation finally returned, it came in whispers. Careful, measured, respectful. No jokes. No mockery. Just quiet reverence for the woman who had been invisible until she reminded them, through nothing but her actions, that true strength doesn't announce itself. Captain Lewis lowered his hand and sat again. His heart pounded. He couldn't look away from her. She wasn't different, he was. The room was. And in that stillness, something inside him cracked open, not from shame, but from recognition. He had worn his confidence like armor, mistaking volume for authority. But she had carried hers in silence, never needing to prove what had already been earned. He realized, maybe for the first time in his career, that leadership wasn't about being seen. It was about seeing others. After dinner, the mess hall slowly emptied. Chairs stacked, lights dimmed. Remained a while longer, sitting at her table, alone again, but this time the quiet wasn't loneliness. It was peace. Private approached hesitantly, holding his tray. "Sergeant." She looked up. "Yes, Private." He swallowed. I just wanted to say thank you for what you did, back then and here." Her gaze softened. "You don't have to thank me, you just have to remember." He nodded, his throat tight. "Yes, ma'am." She gave him a small smile. "Then we're good." He left. And for a while she sat there alone again, only this time she wasn't invisible. Later that night, Captain Lewis found himself standing outside the mess hall doors, staring into the dark. The desert wind carried sand across his boots. The sound of generators hummed low behind him. He thought about what it said. Some of you learned about rank. Some of you learned about weight. He finally understood. Rank can be worn. Weight has to be carried. And had carried more than anyone he'd ever met, quietly, patiently, without asking for a single ounce of recognition. He drew in a breath, looked toward the sky and muttered almost to himself, Valkyrie 6. The words felt heavy, not like a title but like a prayer. Inside, sat by the window, watching the lights of the base flicker. Her reflection stared back at her, older, softer, steadier. She didn't think about medals or missions. She thought about the soldiers who had stood for her tonight. Respect wasn't something she needed. It was something they needed to remember what service meant, to remember that every rank, every role mattered. She sipped her coffee, lukewarm by now, and let out a small breath of contentment. The noise had finally quieted. And in that quiet, truth had found its place. Why did everyone start showing up to breakfast early? The day after the salute, the base woke before dawn. For once, not because of orders, but because no one wanted to be late. The mess hall opened at 600. By 5:50, the line was already forming. Boots scuffed softly against concrete, voices low, no pushing, no cutting, no impatience. It felt almost sacred, like the walls remembered what had happened the night before. Inside moved quietly behind the counter. Same apron, same routine, same steady rhythm. But every movement felt different now, not because she had changed, but because everyone saw her. Every soldier who took a tray met her eyes and said the same two words, "Good morning." It wasn't forced, it wasn't protocol. It was gratitude disguised as habit. Private noticed it first, the calm that followed her. There was something about the way she moved, the way she watched people, that made even the loudest soldiers lower their voices. She never demanded discipline. It simply happened around her. She had become the gravity of the base, quiet, unseen, but always pulling things into place. Captain Lewis arrived last that morning. He didn't try to skip breakfast like before. He waited in line, tray in hand, silent among his own men. When he reached the counter, looked up, their eyes met. "Captain," she said softly. "Sergeant," he replied, equally quiet. For a second, neither of them moved. Then she handed him a plate. "Scrambled or over easy?" He almost smiled. "Whichever you recommend." "Scrambled," she said, "less to regret." He nodded, caught the humor and moved on, and for the first time her dry tone made him laugh. It wasn't loud, but it was real. Later that morning, he found himself sitting alone in his office, staring at her personnel file again. He read every line this time, not out of duty, but out of respect. Served 8 years active, multiple commendations, last tour classified. Below, someone had scrawled a note in black ink. Retained for advisory potential, unofficial mentor. He exhaled slowly. "Mentor," he whispered. It fit. He'd spent years giving speeches about leadership, how to command, how to motivate. Yet the person who'd taught his entire unit the meaning of dignity hadn't said 10 words outside the kitchen. That afternoon, the storm came. Desert storms don't ask permission. The wind hit first, a hot, dry punch that sent sand sweeping across the compound. The horizon vanished. Visibility dropped to 0. The base went into lockdown protocol. The power flickered, radios crackled with static. And somewhere near the flight line, a young private panicked. He'd been assigned to an exposed guard tower. When the storm hit, the line to command went dead. He tried to call out over comms, nothing. He tried again, static. He started breathing fast, voice shaking. "This is Tower 4, I'm losing comms. Visibility's gone." The radio squealed, unreadable noise. He was alone. In the mess hall froze. She recognized that kind of panic not from sound, but from silence between sounds. She turned to the duty NCO. "That's not just static," she said. The sergeant frowned. "Could be a relay issue." "Could be," she said, "or someone's isolated." Before he could respond, she was already untying her apron. "Keep everyone inside. I'll go." "Sergeant, you're not." She was gone before he finished. Outside, the world was colorless. Sand slammed into her face like rain made of knives. She pulled her scarf tight, ducked low, and followed the dim outline of barriers toward the perimeter. Every step vanished behind her, erased instantly by the wind. Visibility maybe 10 feet, maybe 5. But her pace never faltered. She found Tower 4 by memory, a faint silhouette through the storm, half buried in dust. The young private was on the ladder, shouting into a dead radio. His hands shook. She called out, "Private." He turned startled, eyes wide, coughing sand. She climbed the rest of the way up. The platform shook under the wind. "Comms are down," he shouted. "I know," she said calmly, scanning the horizon. Her voice cut through the storm like steel through cloth. "You did good staying on post." He looked at her, disbelief in his eyes. "How did you even find me out here?" She didn't answer, just adjusted the antenna connection, pulled a line of tape from her pocket and patched the wire. Her fingers moved fast, confident, practiced. Within seconds, the radio hissed back to life. "Tower 4, this is base command. Copy." She keyed the mic. "Copy, Tower 4 operational, both accounted for." The relief in the command's reply was immediate. "Acknowledged. Hold until visibility improves." She looked at the private, trembling, exhausted but safe. "You kept your post," she said. "That's what matters." He nodded, still shaking. "Ma'am, how did you know what to do?" She looked out into the storm. "Once you've been cut off enough times," she said softly, "you learn how to reach back." When the storm cleared hours later, word spread again, this time without rumor, without exaggeration. The mess hall cook had gone into a sandstorm to save a soldier she barely knew. And somehow, none of it surprised anyone anymore. Because that was who she was. Not a myth, not a legend. Just a soldier who refused to let anyone be left behind, even in peace. Captain Lewis found her that evening sitting outside, wind still brushing sand off her sleeves. The sky had cleared, the stars raw and sharp overhead. He sat beside her without asking. They watched the horizon in silence for a while. Finally he spoke. "You went out there yourself." She shrugged. "He was scared. I've been that soldier before." He nodded. "You shouldn't have had to." She looked at him, calm, steady. "I didn't have to, I chose to." He took a deep breath, the words catching in his chest. "I used to think leadership was about being followed." She smiled faintly. "It's not. It's about walking where no one else will." He stared at her profile, sharp against the fading light, and felt a quiet kind of shame mix with awe. He'd been chasing medals his whole career. She'd been chasing meaning. And somehow she had found it. Weeks passed. The routine returned, but the rhythm was different now. The soldiers were sharper, calmer, more unified. They cleaned up after meals without being told. They helped the kitchen staff, fixed broken trays, restocked shelves. No one called it chores anymore. They called it respect. Never brought up the salute again. She never spoke about or the. But little by little, she began doing something she hadn't done in years. She taught. Not in classrooms or briefings, quietly, in passing moments. She'd correct a soldier's grip on their rifle during inspection. She'd show a young mechanic how to improvise a field tourniquet using cord and tape. She'd walk past two privates arguing over procedures and simply say, "Slow down, breathe first." And somehow, that one sentence fixed everything. They started calling her ma'am, not because of rank but reverence. Captain Lewis watched all of it unfold. He stopped trying to lead through volume. He started listening, observing, learning. He changed small things, how he spoke to his unit, how he handled mistakes. Instead of barking orders, he began asking questions. He didn't realize it, but his tone had started to sound like hers. And the base, once just a stopover in the desert, started to feel like a family. One night stood outside near the flight line, the same horizon glowing orange under floodlights. The faint thrum of helicopters rolled through the air, familiar, haunting. She closed her eyes. For a moment she was back there again. Mountains, tracer fire, the whine of engines over radio static. Valkyrie 6 inbound hot, hold position. The echo of her own voice carried across time. She opened her eyes again and exhaled. The sound of rotor blades faded into the present. Captain Lewis approached quietly from behind. You miss it. She didn't turn, parts of it. The mission, he asked. The people, she said softly. The noise between danger and silence. The part where everything makes sense before it all stops making sense again. He nodded slowly. You ever wish you stayed in? She smiled faintly. You never really leave, you just change uniforms. He looked at her, the cook, the soldier, the mystery, and realized she was right. You don't retire from who you are, you just carry it differently. That night, as lights dimmed across the base, a new rule formed without anyone saying it. No one made noise after taps near the mess hall window. Because inside, they knew, she sat there most nights with a cup of coffee watching the dark, thinking, remembering. And in that stillness, everyone felt something they couldn't quite name. Something like peace. Something like pride. The kind that doesn't come from medals or missions. The kind that comes from grace. Why did the helicopter call sign sound so familiar? It started with a coded knock on the mess hall door. 3 sharp raps, 1 slow. Looked up from her ledger. The sound wasn't urgent, but it wasn't casual either. She wiped her hands, walked to the door and opened it. Colonel stood there. No aide, no folder, just him and the kind of stillness that carried bad news. Ma'am, he said quietly, we need you. She blinked once. For what? Convoy Bravo, they're pinned halfway up the southern ridge. Sandstorm blew the drone feed out. Air links blind. She hesitated. They have ground comms. Lost it 2 hours ago. She nodded once. How many out there? 8, he said, including Captain Lewis. Her eyes flickered just for a heartbeat. Then, without a word, she unpinned her apron. Minutes later, the flight line was alive. Engines roared. Blades chopped the air into thunder. A single U-60 waited on the tarmac, doors open, floodlights cutting through the haze. Stepped out into the wind, wearing a flight vest that hadn't seen daylight in years. She moved like a ghost through familiar machinery, touching the tail, checking straps, feeling metal under her palms like it was part of her. The pilot, a young lieutenant, stared. Ma'am, you sure you want to? Fly low, slow, and quiet, she said. I'll handle the rest. He nodded, no argument. When stepped up beside her, his voice was low. You don't have to do this. She adjusted her headset. You didn't have to ask. The rotors thundered to life. Dust exploded into the night, swirling around her like smoke. As she climbed aboard, the pilot's voice cut through comms. Call sign, ma'am. She hesitated, then said softly, Valkyrie 6. The pilot looked back at her, recognition flashing in his eyes. Then he keyed the mic. Copy that, Valkyrie 6 lifting off. And just like that, the name returned to the airwaves. The world below vanished into black and gold, dunes glinting like broken glass under moonlight. The helicopter rode the turbulence, weaving through gusts of sand. The crew inside said nothing. They didn't need to. They'd heard the stories. They'd seen the salute. And now the legend sat 10 feet behind them, headset on, eyes fixed on the horizon. Down below, Captain Lewis crouched behind a half-collapsed ridge, radio dead in his hands. His team was exhausted, covered in dust, eyes burning, throats dry. They'd been ambushed on the ridge by a rogue militia unit they hadn't even known operated this far west. Their convoy was wrecked. The radio truck hit first, then the lead vehicle. "Any signal yet?" he asked his comms tech. "Nothing, sir," came the reply. "Sandstorm jammed everything, we're blind." Lewis looked toward the distant glow of tracer rounds against the night sky. The sound of engines echoed faintly, enemy patrols moving closer. He tried to calculate how far they were from base, how long they could hold. His throat tightened. So this is how it feels, he thought, cut off, alone. Then through static, his headset crackled once faint, broken, impossible. "Bravo convoy, this is Valkyrie 6. Do you copy?" Lewis froze. "What did she just say?" one of his men asked. He didn't answer, he pressed the mic. "Say again." The voice came clearer this time, calm, steady, impossible. "Bravo convoy, this is Valkyrie 6. I have your grid, sit tight." Lewis exhaled, half in disbelief, half in awe. "She's coming," he said quietly. From the cockpit, guided the crew through the storm like a conductor through chaos. "Wind shear at 30, drop 10 feet, keep under the ridge line." Her voice was calm, clipped, precise. Every instruction timed perfectly with the terrain. The pilot followed without hesitation. "Ma'am, you flying this or am I?" She smiled faintly. "You're steering, I'm flying." The helicopter roared low over the desert floor, hugging shadows, blades slicing the night in rhythm. Then gunfire. Tracers ripped past the nose, red lines flashing through dust. The crew flinched. The gunner swung around, ready to fire. "Hold your fire," shouted. "They can't see us. Don't give them a target." Her tone, absolute command. The gunner froze, finger off the trigger. She scanned the map in her lap, marking positions, recalculating. 2 clicks east of the ridge. We'll come in behind them. On the ground, Lewis' men huddled low. The sound of gunfire grew closer, short bursts, searching patterns. Then through the wind and the sand came another sound, faint at first, then unmistakable. Rotors. But not overhead. Behind. Lewis looked up, eyes wide. No way. The helicopter rose out of the dark like a phantom, slow, deliberate, engines muffled by the storm. It hovered just behind the ridge, floodlights snapping on at the last second. The gunfire stopped. The enemy scrambled, blinded. His voice echoed over the radio, crisp, commanding. "Bravo convoy, move to extraction point Alpha. You've got 60 seconds, move." Lewis didn't hesitate. "You heard her, go, move." They ran, boots pounding through sand, bullets chasing shadows. His voice kept coming through the headset, calm as stone. "Left of the ridge, Captain, 10 meters, keep low." "Copy." Her timing was perfect. Every burst of cover fire aligned with her direction. It wasn't luck, it was instinct. The kind that doesn't die, no matter how long you try to bury it. Within minutes, the last soldier jumped aboard the helicopter. Lewis was the last to climb. He turned once, scanning the dark. "Everyone in." "Count complete," the gunner confirmed. 8 aboard. Nodded, eyes locked on the horizon. "Then let's go home." The pilot pulled up hard. The lifted through the storm, blades screaming against the wind. As they cleared the ridge, the gunner finally broke the silence. "Who is she?" Lewis looked across the cabin, at headset on, face calm, hands steady on the comm switch. "She's the reason you're alive," he said. The flight back was quiet. No one spoke, no one dared. The hum of the engine filled the space, steady, comforting, alive. Lewis sat across from her, helmet in his lap. He wanted to say something, anything, but what words could match the weight of what had just happened? Finally, he tried. "You didn't have to come for us." She looked at him, expression unreadable. "You're my people." He swallowed hard. "We don't deserve that." Her tone softened. "You didn't have to." When the helicopter landed, the base was waiting. Floodlights washed the runway white. Medics ran forward. Command staff followed close behind. Colonel stood near the tarmac, eyes fixed on the descending bird. When the rotors slowed, he stepped forward. The door opened. Stepped out first, covered in dust, headset still around her neck. Met her halfway. "Report." 8 accounted for. No fatalities, minor injuries. He nodded. "Outstanding work." She shook her head. "Team effort." He smiled faintly. "It always is until it is." Captain Lewis limped out behind her, helmet under his arm, face drawn but alive. He stopped beside her. "You flew that bird like you'd never left." She gave a faint smile. "Maybe I never did." He nodded, his voice low. "Valkyrie 6. She froze, not at the title, but at the respect in his tone. "Don't say it like that," she said softly. "Like what?" "Like it's something holy. It's just a call sign." He shook his head. "Not anymore." That night the base was alive with whispers again, but this time no rumors, no gossip. Just stories, stories told softly under the stars. About the woman who came back from the quiet. About the call sign that returned when all hope was lost. Sat alone near the airfield, coffee in hand, staring at the same sky she'd watched countless nights before. The helicopter blades had stopped spinning, but their rhythm still echoed in her chest. She'd spent months trying to disappear, to live small, to serve quietly. But the truth had found her again. Not to glorify her, not to drag her back, but to remind her of what she was made of. Some people are built for noise, others for silence, and a rare few for both. As the wind settled, she whispered into the dark, almost to herself. 43 then, 8 tonight. The numbers didn't make her proud, they made her grateful. Because she'd learned long ago, survival isn't the victory. Coming back different is. Colonel found her sitting there, the sky just beginning to pale. He didn't salute, didn't interrupt. He just stood beside her, looking at the same horizon. Finally, he said quietly, "You know they're writing a new report about tonight." She chuckled softly. "They always do." He smiled. "Want to know the title?" She raised an eyebrow. "Does it matter?" He shrugged. "They called it Valkyrie 6 Returns." She laughed, a small, tired sound that carried something warmer than irony. "Sounds dramatic." "It is," he said, "but then again, so's the truth." The sun broke over the desert, the same light she'd seen 1,000 times before, yet somehow new. She watched it climb the horizon, spilling across the hangars, across the sand, across the faces of soldiers beginning another day. They would never forget what she'd done. But she hoped they'd remember why she did it. Not for medals, not for rank. For each other. For the quiet, unspoken promise that soldiers keep. No one gets left behind. Why did the base feel lighter? The storm was gone, the sky had cleared. And for the first time in months, the desert didn't feel like punishment, it felt like home. The convoy was back, the wounded were stable. No funerals this time. Just faces covered in bandages and smiles that didn't know how to hide gratitude. The hum of helicopters had faded into the distance, replaced by laughter in the yard. The kind of laughter that comes from relief, from having been close enough to the edge to finally appreciate solid ground again. Stood outside the infirmary, hands tucked into her pockets, her eyes on the horizon. She wasn't smiling, but something in her posture had softened, like a weight she didn't realize she was carrying had finally been set down. She watched as the soldiers she'd rescued walked past her limping, talking, alive. Each of them nodded, some saluted, Some just whispered, "Ma'am." And she nodded back, saying nothing. She'd never been one for speeches. Captain Lewis emerged from the infirmary last, arm in a sling, dust still clinging to his uniform. He stopped when he saw her. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then quietly he said, "They told me you flew half-blind through that storm. That true?" She shrugged. "Depends who's telling it." He smiled faintly. "The pilot said you saved his life." She looked out toward the flight line. "We all save each other. That's how this works." He nodded slowly. "You know, before that night, I used to think leadership meant standing in front." "And now?" she asked. He exhaled. "Now I think it means standing when no one else will." She smiled, small, tired, but real. "Then you've learned the only lesson that matters." Later that evening, the base gathered without being told to. No order, no formation, just presence. They filled the courtyard outside the mess hall, the same place where the salute had happened weeks before. The air was cool, the sky scattered with stars. The sound of boots and murmurs blended into one low hum. Colonel stepped up onto a concrete platform. No microphone, no ceremony, just a man with words that needed saying. He looked out over the crowd, soldiers of every rank, every background, every story. "I'm not here to give a speech," he began. "I'm here to acknowledge something that doesn't fit neatly into a report." He turned slightly toward, standing at the edge of the crowd. "Sergeant reminded this base of something we forget too often, that titles fade, ranks shift, and medals collect dust. But character," he paused, "character stays." The silence that followed was deep, honest, and clean. Continued. "You don't need to carry a rifle to serve with courage. You don't need command to lead. Sometimes, the bravest act is continuing to show up when no one's watching." His gaze lingered on. "And sometimes, the loudest voice on a battlefield belongs to the one who never raises it." The crowd didn't cheer. They didn't clap. They just stood there, heads bowed, hearts full. Because some moments don't ask for applause. They ask for understanding. Afterward, soldiers approached her in ones and twos, some to thank her, some to just stand beside her in silence. Even the youngest privates seemed different now, sharper, humbler, carrying something invisible she'd given them without trying, a standard. Private handed her a folded patch, his unit insignia. "For you, ma'am, for what you taught us." She looked down at it, tracing the stitching with her thumb. "I didn't teach you," she said softly. "You listened, that's the hard part." He smiled, embarrassed, then saluted and walked away. Later, she sat alone inside the mess hall, the same seat, the same coffee, the same faint hum of refrigerators in the background. But this time, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt earned. On the table beside her sat a small stack of letters, handwritten, folded neatly. Thank yous from soldiers, officers, even civilians. She hadn't opened most of them. She didn't need to. What mattered wasn't in ink. It was in the change she saw every morning. The discipline, the quiet respect, the way soldiers now lifted their heads a little higher and spoke a little softer. It wasn't perfection, it was progress. And that was enough. Captain Lewis entered quietly. No salute, no stiffness, just presence. He sat across from her, placing 2 cups of coffee on the table. "Figured you'd be here." "Always am," she said, smiling faintly. "Routine's a hard habit." He nodded. "Routine's what keeps us sane." They sat in silence for a moment, steam rising between them. Then Lewis said quietly, "You know they're nomming the new helipad Valkyrie." She looked up startled. "They shouldn't." "Wasn't my idea," he said. "Was everyone's." She shook her head. "That name doesn't belong to me." "Maybe not," he said, "but the meaning does." Outside, the sound of evening drills faded. The night wind brushed against the open window. Lewis leaned back, his voice softer. You could taken the easy route, stayed retired, stayed invisible, but you came back. Sipped her coffee. You don't get to choose when you're called, you just decide how you answer. He smiled, and how you answered changed everyone here. She looked out at the dim lights of the base, at the soldiers walking quietly between tents, laughing low, moving with new purpose. Maybe, she said, but they changed me too. He frowned slightly. How? She turned back to him, eyes warm, distant. They reminded me that service doesn't end when the war does. It just finds new forms. Sometimes it's flying, sometimes it's cooking, sometimes it's just showing up. He nodded. That's what they'll remember. She smiled. I hope not. He blinked. You do. She shook her head. I don't want to be remembered. I want them to remember what mattered. The lights dimmed across the base. The mess hall emptied, quiet settling like dust after rain. Stayed seated for a while longer, staring at the mug in her hands. Every soldier leaves a part of themselves behind, in the soil, in the air, in the people they've touched. The trick isn't avoiding it. It's making sure the part you leave behind is worth something. She set her cup down, stood, and walked toward the kitchen, slow, steady steps, the same rhythm that had carried her through every battle, every loss, every moment of silence. And for the first time, it didn't feel like she was walking away from something. It felt like she was walking home. Weeks later, her reassignment came through. Back to stateside rotation, non-combat advisory role. No fanfare, no announcement, just a line in a memo. When she packed her few belongings, a photo of her old flight crew, her coffee mug, a single folded flag, she smiled. Not because she was leaving, but because she wasn't leaving empty. Outside, the base gathered one last time. No orders, no speeches. Just people standing in the morning light, waiting. She walked out into the open, duffel over her shoulder. Private stood at attention near the front, Captain Lewis beside him. Even Colonel was there, hands clasped behind his back, expression unreadable. As she passed, they didn't speak. They didn't need to. They just saluted. Not sharp, not ceremonial. Just honest. She paused, looked at them all, faces young and old, tired and proud, and nodded once. Carry it forward, she said softly. That's all I ask. Then she turned, climbed into the transport truck, and didn't look back. As the engine rumbled to life, dust rose behind the wheels. The base grew smaller in the mirror, the mess hall, the helipad, the flags whipping in the wind. Captain Lewis watched until the truck disappeared over the ridge. Then he turned to the others. The air felt heavier now, but in a good way, like weight that meant something. He looked at, you think she'll ever come back? Smiled faintly. People like her never really leave. Months later, a new plaque appeared beside the mess hall door. No medals, no pictures. Just 3 lines, etched clean into brushed steel. Valkyrie 6. In quiet service, in loud storms, in all things steady. She never spoke of it, she just acted. And in that, they finally understood the moral she had lived by, the one she never said aloud but had written through every action, every silence, every moment she refused to break. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts.